I stood at the back of the room, my hands stuffed into the pockets of my suit jacket. The funeral home was packed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong here. Karina, my wife, stood at the front with her siblings, holding it together in front of the crowd, delivering the eulogy with a polished grace that made me feel even more out of place. This wasn't the first funeral I'd been to, but it was the first one where I felt like an outsider, like I wasn't even supposed to be here. I knew the look Karina gave me before we walked in, that polite, almost apologetic smile, the one that says, "I'm not sure where you fit into all of this, but here you are anyway." That look had become more familiar in recent months, but today it felt more pronounced than ever. I glanced at my seat, which remained empty. She had made sure of that, of course. She had organized every detail, where her family would sit, where the flowers would go, where the guests would stand. Everything had been carefully curated. Even my absence felt like a statement, as if my presence would somehow complicate things, add to the tension. I wasn't just being paranoid, though. I could feel the weight of it, the way her family didn't quite know what to do with me, the way her siblings avoided eye contact, the way her mother's expression stiffened every time I came close. Karina's voice floated to me from the front, and I focused on her. She was reading from a piece of paper, reciting lines about Glenn's life, his career, his larger-than-life personality. She spoke with such control, such precision. It was as if she'd done this 100 times before. The tone of her voice was perfect. There was no hint of personal emotion, no crack that would have let anyone know she was grieving. It was all about maintaining appearances. As she spoke, I felt a growing sense of alienation. She mentioned her siblings, of course. She spoke of her childhood, of how her father had shaped each of their lives. She mentioned everyone except me. It wasn't just that I wasn't included in the eulogy. I could feel the deliberate exclusion, the unspoken distance between us that seemed to stretch even further with every word she said. I wasn't even sure why I was here anymore. If I was being honest with myself, this funeral felt more like a performance for her than an emotional moment of loss. The distance between us, the one I had ignored for so long, was laid bare for everyone to see, and I could feel it. I could feel her distance from me. I wasn't just a stranger to her family. I was becoming a stranger to her too. The service carried on, but I felt like I was floating outside of it. Karina's calm composure, her immaculate poise, only made the growing sense of isolation inside me more pronounced. There was no comfort to be found in this room, no sense of connection. It felt like I was watching a play, and I was the only one in the audience who didn't know the script. As she finished the eulogy, Karina didn't even look in my direction. She didn't even acknowledge my existence in this moment, and that was when it hit me. This wasn't just a funeral. It was a symbolic representation of where we were in our marriage, where we had always been. I wasn't part of her world. Not then, not now. I stood in the back, the coldness of the room seeping into my bones, wondering how things had gone so wrong. Was this how it was going to be? Was I really just a side character in her life story? One that could be discarded or ignored at a moment's notice? As the ceremony went on, I stayed at the back, watching her, feeling the weight of my solitude press harder than ever. The funeral had finally ended, but the weight of the day didn't lift. Karina, ever composed, stood surrounded by her family, accepting condolences, nodding politely. I hung back, unsure of where I fit in. No one acknowledged me. No one even seemed to notice that I was there, other than to stand awkwardly at the periphery of the group. As I made my way toward the exit, my eyes drifted over the room, trying to find a reason to feel connected. And then I saw it, a small, delicate handkerchief that had fallen from Karina's purse. I bent down instinctively to pick it up, not thinking much of it, until something caught my eye. There, beneath the soft folds of fabric, was a document, its edges peeking out from underneath, a name printed in bold at the top, Wendell Darcy. Curiosity, though unwelcome, pushed me to slide the paper out, my fingers trembling slightly as I unfolded it. My eyes scanned the lines, the words slowly coming into focus as I read them, my breath caught in my throat. Petition for divorce. I reread the words again, as though I might have missed something, but no. This wasn't a mistake. Karina had filed for divorce, not after some argument, not after some long discussion about where we stood. No, she had quietly, methodically filed for divorce before her father's funeral, before the loss, before the mourning, before any of it. The finality of it all hit me like a slap to the face. It was already done. I stood frozen, holding the paper, my heart pounding in my chest. She had already made the decision to end our marriage. It was all right here, in black and white. A final severing of the tie. And then, as I skimmed further, my eyes landed on another chilling detail. Karina Darcy, beneficiary of the Darby estate. The realization that came next was almost unbearable. Karina was about to inherit a fortune, $250 million, while I stood here, a mere footnote in her life. I had been nothing more than a pawn in her game, a means to an end, a title, a husband for appearances. Her affection had been a facade, a tool to secure her place in the family's wealth. I felt hollow, empty. I had known something was wrong, but this was beyond anything I had imagined. Karina's love for me had never been real. It had never been about me. It had been about what I could provide, what she could extract from me to further secure her place in the world. As I stood there, the funeral still echoing in my mind, I realized that I wasn't even angry anymore. I wasn't sad, I was numb. I had been used, discarded, and left to pick up the pieces of a life I had been living under false pretenses. I folded the paper carefully, as if handling something too fragile to keep in my hands for long. And then, I tucked it away into my coat pocket, making my way out of the funeral home. My footsteps felt heavier than before, like I was carrying not just the weight of the document, but the weight of the last 10 years of my life. The truth was inescapable, and there was no going back. Everything had changed. I wasn't sure why I had even bothered to come to the will reading. Maybe it was some form of masochism, or maybe I just needed closure. Either way, I didn't feel much of anything as I sat in the stiff, sterile office of Glenn's lawyer, waiting for the formalities to begin. Karina, as always, looked flawless. She was sitting next to a man I didn't recognize, her hand resting lightly on his. He was younger than me, sharply dressed, the kind of guy who probably made a career out of being charming. They exchanged a few whispered words before the lawyer, a middle-aged man with a perpetually blank expression, started sorting through the papers in front of him. I glanced at Karina again, trying not to feel the bitterness that had slowly been growing inside me. She was composed, her face a mask of polite indifference. It almost felt as though she were enjoying this moment, as if the reading of the will was just another box to tick off in her carefully orchestrated life. The lawyer cleared his throat, interrupting my thoughts. Well, as you all know, Glenn Darby's will is a rather extensive document. He had many assets and a few special requests. Let's begin, he said, flipping open the will. He started with the usual things, the house in the Hamptons, the cars, the investments. Everything was methodical, everything was expected. Karina nodded along as her father's estate was read aloud, her eyes glinting with the satisfaction of hearing her inheritance itemized like a shopping list. The tension in the room was palpable, as though everyone knew what the end result would be. Then, the lawyer's voice shifted slightly, reading a line I hadn't expected. Mr. Darby's estate, after all debts are settled, will be divided as follows. To his children, each will receive a significant portion. To his wife, a substantial allowance for her comfort and care. And finally, I sat up straighter, my eyes narrowing as the lawyer paused. To Wendell Darcy, the sum total of Glenn Darby's assets from his private collection, valued at over $150 million. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to react. My head spun. The shock of hearing my name, the name that had been so carefully excluded from Karina's eulogy, mixed with the realization of what it meant. I turned to look at Karina. Her face had gone pale, the controlled mask slipping for just a second, enough for me to catch a flicker of panic in her eyes. I was still processing the lawyer's words when Karina leaned forward, her voice tight. "That's a mistake," she said, her voice strained. "Wendell doesn't deserve that." The lawyer looked down at the papers, scanning the lines quickly. "No, Ms. Darby, it's clear. Mr. Darby left the bulk of his estate to Wendell. He specifically stated in his will that Wendell was to inherit it all, with certain stipulations regarding the maintenance of the collection and its future handling." I watched Karina's face twist with a combination of disbelief and fury. She was quiet, her eyes flicking between the lawyer and me. This was what Glenn had wanted. This was his final message. And though I couldn't understand why, I couldn't ignore the sting of irony in it. Glenn had always treated me like an outsider too, but in the end, he had chosen me. Karina, meanwhile, was visibly unraveling, her hand clenched at her side, her knuckles white. "This isn't fair," she muttered, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "This isn't how it was supposed to be." I sat frozen, still processing the weight of the moment. The lawyer continued to read through the will, but my mind was elsewhere. I had been the fool, playing the role of the supportive husband, playing along with her carefully crafted life, while she had been plotting for years. She was about to inherit millions, but she had lost everything that mattered in the process. I didn't know what to do with myself in that moment. It wasn't about the money, it was about something far deeper. Karina's world, her perfect facade, was crashing down around her. She was angry, but I wasn't sure whether she was angry at Glenn for going against her, or at me for being the one to receive his final gift. As I stood up to leave the room, the weight of everything settled on my shoulders. I didn't know where this would lead, whether this would be the beginning of my fight for something I had never thought I wanted, or if it would mark the moment I walked away from everything Karina had built. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. The day after the will reading, I didn't expect Karina to show up at my office, but she did. I was standing behind the counter, rearranging some paperwork, when the sound of the doorbell chimed, signaling someone's entry. I glanced up, half expecting one of my regulars. Instead, it was Karina, looking impeccable as always, her business attire sharp, her hair neatly styled. She was wearing that same cold, calculated look she often reserved for her family's social events. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She stood just inside the door, her eyes sweeping the space before landing on me. The air between us felt thicker than usual, but there was a nervous energy in her that didn't quite match her usual composed demeanor. "Wendell," she said, her voice smooth, but there was something strained about it. "We need to talk." I didn't respond immediately. I hadn't been sure what to expect after the will reading, but I certainly hadn't expected her to come here. I had made it clear that things were different now, but I couldn't help but feel a small flutter of confusion. "About what?" I finally asked, my voice flat. I didn't want to give her an inch. She smiled, the kind of smile that always made me question whether she was being genuine or playing a game. "About the inheritance," she said, walking toward me, her steps measured. "You know, Wendell, I've been thinking a lot about everything, and about what's fair." I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. "Fair?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "You mean the money?" She sat down on the nearest chair, crossing her legs with a casual grace. "Not just the money," she said, her eyes locking with mine, "but the life we've built together, the future we should have. Look, I know things haven't been perfect between us. But now, with everything happening, maybe we could—" She hesitated, as if searching for the right words. I wasn't sure if it was the honesty she was trying to find, or the manipulation she had perfected. Either way, I could feel the weight of her next words coming. "I'll take a smaller portion of the inheritance," she said, her tone dropping to a softer register. "I'll even walk away from the estate, Wendell. If you agree to let me handle everything, if you let me keep what's rightfully mine, and leave quietly." I stared at her, disbelief mixing with the ache of knowing this was her first real attempt to regain control. "You're offering me what exactly? A few crumbs in exchange for my silence?" She smiled faintly, almost condescendingly. "Not crumbs, Wendell. A chance to start over. A chance to put this all behind us without any more pain. We've both been through a lot." The temptation to take her offer, the easy out, hit me harder than I cared to admit. She was offering me a way to step back from everything. The fights, the lies, the chaos. No more of her coldness, no more of the hurt she had put me through. I could walk away from this, live the life I thought I wanted without the mess. But then, her words rang in my mind. "You don't deserve this." A flicker of doubt rose in my chest, but I pushed it down. I knew what this was, Karina's calculated, manipulative attempt to regain control. She didn't want to give me the inheritance. She wanted to control the narrative. She always had. I shook my head slowly, the decision already settling in my gut. "No," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "I'm not going to do that." Her smile faltered, just for a moment, and then her expression hardened. "Wendell, don't be foolish," she warned, her voice laced with frustration. "You don't want to make this difficult. It's not worth it." I stood, gathering my thoughts, feeling a sense of strength I hadn't felt in a long time. "No, Karina, you don't want to make this difficult. Not for me. Not for you." For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't under her thumb. The idea of reclaiming my life, of standing up to her, was terrifying. But at the same time, it felt like the only option. I wasn't just fighting for money anymore. I was fighting for something far more valuable, my dignity. "I'm not walking away from this," I said, my words cutting through the air between us. "And I'm not walking away from you, for you to control everything." For a second I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, something close to panic, but it was gone just as quickly, replaced by that same, practiced smile. "Well, if you're going to make this difficult," she said, standing up, "then we'll see how long you last." She turned and walked toward the door, leaving me standing there, still processing what had just transpired. The temptation to give in, to fall back into the life I had known with her, had almost won out, but for the first time, I had said no. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew this. I wasn't giving her control anymore. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't expecting it. The thick envelope was embossed with the Darby family crest, official, impersonal. I knew immediately it was from Glenn's lawyer. When I opened it, the weight of its contents hit me like a freight train. The inheritance terms were complicated, far more than I'd ever imagined. There was one clause that stood out. If Wendell Darcy reconciles with Karina Darcy, he will forfeit his inheritance and be penalized for any prior distribution. The words blurred together for a moment as I tried to process it. Reconciliation. It wasn't just a suggestion, it was a requirement. If I wanted the estate, if I wanted to move forward with the money Glenn had left behind, I couldn't reconcile with Karina. I'd never been one for paperwork, but this felt like a choice I couldn't ignore. In that moment, I understood exactly how far Karina had gone to manipulate this entire situation. The money wasn't just about securing herself financially. It was about controlling everything, even the way I would move forward in my life. I sat back in my chair, holding the letter in my hands, the world outside my window seeming to fade into the background. Everything felt murky, as if the lines between right and wrong had blurred. How could I not take the money? How could I ignore the temptation? It was mine. I was the one who was supposed to inherit it all. But that clause, the one that tied me to Karina's presence or absence in my life, felt like another one of her traps. What did I want? The question echoed in my mind. This inheritance could change everything. It could give me the power to do anything I wanted. It could offer me freedom, security, and a fresh start. But it came with the cost of never reconciling with Karina, never going back to the life we once shared. Her words from the will reading came back to me. "You don't deserve this." Was she right? Was I worthy of the inheritance? I had never asked for it, but it was now in my grasp. I put the letter down on the table, trying to center myself. Karina was relentless in her manipulation. Even after the will was read, even after everything that had been revealed, she had found another way to control me, to trap me into staying in her orbit. But this time, I wasn't the same person who had walked into that funeral home. I knew the power this inheritance could give me, but the more I thought about it, the less I wanted it. Was the money worth the chains it would place on me? Could I really move forward, free of Karina's influence, if I had to accept her conditions? Or was this her last, most dangerous move, to make me feel trapped by my own choices? I leaned back in my chair, eyes closed, heart heavy. The decision felt too big, too overwhelming. The inheritance was tempting, but every time I thought about Karina's manipulation, her coldness, the years of emotional distance, the answer became clearer. I wasn't sure I wanted her back. But what if the inheritance could be a way out? What if it was the final tie I could sever to this life? A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. I looked up. It was Karina. My pulse quickened, not from excitement, but from a deep, unsettling dread. She was standing there, looking as perfect as ever. Calm, collected, and ready to manipulate. "Wendell," she began, her voice smooth but laced with something I couldn't quite place. "We need to talk about the will." I didn't respond immediately. I didn't want to be in the same room with her, not yet, not after everything. But there she was, stepping into my space, bringing all the familiar tension with her. "I know it's a lot to process," she continued, walking toward me with that same calculated ease. "But we can work this out. I don't want to fight you for the inheritance. We don't have to do this the hard way." Her eyes bore into mine, searching for some sign of weakness. But I wasn't the same man who had married her. I wasn't the same man who had stood by her side, trying to please her, trying to earn her love. I met her gaze without flinching. "You don't want to fight?" I repeated, my voice low. "Karina, you've been fighting me for years, and now you're asking me to let you have what you want, again." She flinched just slightly, but it was enough for me to see the cracks in her composure. I'm trying to be reasonable, she said, her voice softer, almost pleading. We don't have to make this worse. Just let me have the inheritance, Wendell. Take the smaller portion, and we'll move on. Her words were slick, calculated, a final attempt to pull me back into her web. I could feel the pull, the temptation to give in. But something inside me hardened. No, I said, my voice firmer now. This is mine, Karina, and I'm not going to let you manipulate me anymore. Her expression shifted, her mask slipping for just a moment. You don't deserve this, she whispered, the words edged with something darker now. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She stepped back, her eyes narrowing. You'll regret this, she warned, but I stood my ground. I wasn't going to let her dictate my life any longer. I watched her leave, the weight of the decision still pressing down on me. But for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: freedom. It was a quiet afternoon when Karina showed up at my cousin's house. The doorbell rang, and when I answered, there she was. No longer the cold, polished woman who had controlled every aspect of our marriage, but someone different. She looked vulnerable. Her makeup was minimal, her hair tousled, as if she had just come from a place that wasn't her usual world. Her clothes were casual, an oversized sweater and jeans, an attempt at normalcy that I couldn't quite believe. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. Wendell, she said softly, her voice a touch unsteady. Can we talk? I paused, unsure how to respond. The Karina I knew would never ask for a conversation this way. She would have barged in, demanded what she wanted, and manipulated me into it. But this was different. There was no control in her voice, no command, just a request, almost like a plea. I stepped aside, allowing her to come in, though I kept my distance, leaning against the doorframe. She glanced around the room briefly before sitting on the couch, her posture tense, her hands fidgeting in her lap. I've been thinking, she began, her words deliberate, as if she was carefully selecting each one, about everything. About the will and about what's happening with us. Her gaze dropped, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a crack in her armor. She was human, vulnerable, and yet a part of me still couldn't bring myself to believe it. I wasn't expecting any of this, she continued, her voice lower now. It's just, everything's changed. I didn't expect to lose my father like that, and now, with the will, with the inheritance, it's all so overwhelming. I watched her closely, my mind still on the letter and the terms of the inheritance. This wasn't the woman who had orchestrated the whole situation from the start. No, this woman, this softer version, was trying to regain control in a way that didn't quite feel genuine. She glanced up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of frustration and sadness. Wendell, She stopped herself, almost as though she was battling something inside. I didn't give her the opportunity to continue her rehearsed lines. Karina, don't, I said, my tone calm yet firm. I know what you're doing, and I'm not buying it. She looked taken aback, but quickly masked it with a sigh. I'm not trying to manipulate you. I swear. I've been thinking. I never wanted it to come to this. Her attempt to sound vulnerable was painfully transparent. She wasn't sad about the will. She wasn't distraught over her father's death. She was upset because she had lost control. She was no longer the one pulling the strings, and that terrified her. I'm sorry about everything, she said, her voice quivering just slightly. I know I haven't been perfect, and I've hurt you. I see that now. I was just trying to protect what was mine, but I didn't mean to lose you in the process. Her words stung, but not because they were heartfelt. It was the act of them, the way she delivered them, like she had practiced it, like she was trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed anymore. She wasn't apologizing because she cared about me. She was apologizing because she needed something from me. Don't, I said again, sharper this time. You didn't lose me because of the will, Karina. You lost me because of you. You never cared about us. You only cared about what I could give you. She opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. No, I said firmly. I'm done letting you pull me back in. You've been controlling me for so long, and I let it happen. But not anymore. This isn't about your inheritance or your manipulation. It's about me getting my life back. She stared at me, her face paling. For a brief moment, I saw something almost desperate flash in her eyes. But then it was gone, quickly replaced by the same cold mask she wore so well. You don't mean that, she whispered, barely audible. I do, I replied. my voice unwavering. And you can't make me feel guilty about it anymore. I didn't give her the chance to say anything else. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there in the silence. The weight of the moment hung in the air like an invisible cloud, but I felt lighter than I had in months. I had made my choice. I wouldn't let her pull me back into her world of manipulation and control. This time, I was in charge of my own life. I didn't expect to find anything. At least, that's what I told myself as I sat at my desk, scrolling through Glenn's old emails on his private server. But curiosity was a cruel thing. It gnawed at me, urging me to dig deeper. What else had Karina been hiding? The server was a goldmine of information, and as I sifted through the countless messages, I stumbled upon an email that immediately caught my eye. It was dated just a few days before Glenn passed away. I opened it cautiously, heart pounding as I read the words. It was from Karina, addressed to Glenn's lawyer. The email was short but clear. I would like to amend my father's will to ensure Wendell does not receive the full inheritance. Please make the necessary adjustments. I froze. Amend the will? She had tried to change it after Glenn's death. I scrolled down, my breath quickening as I found more emails. Each one a desperate attempt by Karina to manipulate the will, to erase the clause that had left me the majority of Glenn's estate. She had been plotting this for months, trying to take control even after his death. A sickening realization settled in my chest. Karina hadn't just been trying to win me back. She had been trying to secure everything for herself, even if it meant erasing Glenn's final wishes. My anger surged, but it wasn't the kind of blind rage I had felt before. This time, I saw her for what she truly was. A manipulator, a liar, someone who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the evidence settling heavily in my hands. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about integrity. Glenn had made his wishes clear, and Karina had tried to erase them because she didn't like the outcome. I wasn't sure what to do with this information just yet, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about exposing the truth. I grabbed my phone and called my lawyer. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. "I've found something." The plan started to form in my mind. Slowly, methodically. I wasn't just going to fight her for the money. I was going to fight for Glenn's legacy, for what he had wanted, and I had the leverage now. Karina would no longer be the one pulling the strings. It was my turn to take control. Karina showed up at my cousin's house the next afternoon, uninvited and without warning. She had called, but I didn't pick up. It didn't matter. She was here now, standing at the door with that same air of control she'd always carried. But there was something different this time. Something off. It wasn't the usual forceful presence. It was more like she was clinging to the remnants of what she could still control. I opened the door, and she stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. The discomfort in her posture telling me she wasn't quite used to this place. It wasn't fancy or glamorous, nothing like the life she'd lived with me. But I was done with that world, and she was about to learn that. "I didn't expect you to come," I said, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. My tone was flat, no longer pleading. She hesitated, glancing at me with that sharp, calculating look I knew so well. But there was something underneath, something raw. "Wendell," she said, her voice softer than usual. "I know we've been through a lot, but this is harder than I thought." I didn't answer. I just stared at her, waiting for the inevitable. The manipulation, the charm. She sighed, dropping her shoulders. "I was wrong," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were right all along. I've been selfish. I didn't realize how much I was pushing you away until now. And the will, everything. I never expected it to turn out like this." I wasn't moved. In fact, I felt almost numb to it now. She was trying to make herself the victim again, the poor, misunderstood woman who just wanted to fix everything. It was the same pattern, the same act, but I wasn't buying it anymore. "I'm sorry," she said again, looking up at me with wide, pleading eyes. "I didn't want it to be like this. I didn't know how to handle all of this. I thought I could make it work, keep everything together. But now, I don't know." I could hear the desperation in her voice now, feel the panic in her words, but I wasn't fooled. I saw right through it. She wasn't sorry for me. She was sorry for herself, for the empire she had built, using me as a pawn, and now that empire was crumbling. "I'm not the one who needs to change, Karina," I said, my voice steady. "You are." And it's too late for that. Her face flickered with shock, then confusion. What are you talking about? Wendell, we've been through too much for you to just walk away now. I'm offering you a way out, a way to start over. We can fix this. We don't have to let the inheritance tear us apart. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Start over? I repeated. You don't get it, Karina. You never did. This isn't about the money or the inheritance or starting over. This is about you using me for everything I was worth, emotionally, financially, and when you didn't need me anymore, you just discarded me. Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. I couldn't be. This was her last act of control, trying to pull me back into the life we once had, a life I was no longer part of. I'm not going to fall for it again, I said, stepping away from the door. Not this time. You don't get to manipulate me. Not anymore. She stood there, her face pale, the words dying on her lips. For a second, I saw something that wasn't just manipulation. There was regret, maybe even fear, but I couldn't tell if it was real or just another act. I don't know what you want from me, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know how to let go. That's your problem, Karina, I said, my tone final. You never knew how to let go. Of me. Of everything. I walked toward the door, turning the handle. I'm done, I said, my voice steady. I'm done being your backup. I'm done being your safety net. I'm done. I opened the door and stood there, waiting for her to say something. Anything. But she didn't. She stood frozen, staring at me, the weight of my words sinking in. Goodbye, Karina, I said, and closed the door between us. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. No more games, no more manipulation, no more lies. Just the quiet, still space I needed to reclaim my life. The life that didn't have her in it. It was over, and I was free. I hadn't expected to find what I was looking for, but there it was, tucked in an unassuming file among Glenn's medical records. It was a series of notes detailing his care over the last few months of his life. What caught my eye, however, was one entry, an unusual note about the dosage of medication he'd been prescribed. The doctor's handwriting was barely legible, but the words stood out clearly enough. Increased dosage. Patient's condition worsening, but family requests expedient treatment. I read it again, my heart rate picking up. It was dated just a week before Glenn passed away. That wasn't normal. A request for expedited treatment, a doctor following an instruction that wasn't medically necessary. It didn't sit right with me. I pulled up the security footage from the hospital's system, which I had managed to access through a connection at my firm. The video showed Karina entering Glenn's room alone, a tense conversation between her and the attending nurse, followed by Karina leaving with a satisfied look on her face. The footage was time-stamped just hours before Glenn's sudden decline. I wasn't a doctor, but I knew enough to understand that there were choices made in Glenn's care, choices that could have been influenced by someone who stood to gain, someone like Karina. My stomach twisted. The realization hit me like a truck. Karina had been involved in accelerating her father's death. She hadn't just been trying to manipulate the will, she had been trying to force the clock to run out faster so that she could inherit. I stared at the screen, unable to look away from the footage. This was the final piece of the puzzle, a cold, methodical calculation on her part, and I had been blind to it all. For years, I had been living under the illusion of her love, her control, and now I knew the truth. She wasn't just manipulative. She was willing to go as far as needed to get what she wanted, even if it meant taking someone's life to speed up her own gain. I didn't feel anger anymore, not like before. This was something else, a mixture of disgust, regret, and clarity. I had spent so much time thinking that I was the victim, but now I understood. Karina had been the one orchestrating everything from the beginning, the marriage, the inheritance, everything. The power shifted inside me. I had a choice now, a choice to let this information fester, or a choice to use it. Karina's manipulation had gone too far, but I wasn't going to expose her now, not immediately. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing she had lost everything. Instead, I was going to let her live with it, the fear, the uncertainty. Let her believe she had control, just long enough for her to drown in the consequences of her own actions. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking slightly as I closed the laptop. It wasn't over yet, but I was ready for the final step. For now, I would keep this truth hidden, but Karina wouldn't escape it, not forever. Not when the time came to finally take control of my life and her manipulations. She would face the consequences, and when that time came, she would know everything she did, everything she took from me, had a price. The next move was mine. The lake was quiet as I sat on the porch of my modest new home, the gentle hum of nature filling the space. Two rescue dogs lay at my feet, one with a ball in his mouth, the other sprawled lazily on the deck. I had finally found peace, or at least I was getting closer to it. The house was small, but it felt like freedom. Every corner, every creak in the floorboards held a sense of ownership, a feeling I hadn't known in years. I had spent so much of my life caught in a web of lies, manipulation, and control. But now, as I sat here, it was just me, the dogs, and the stillness. It felt right. The inheritance, the money, it was never about the wealth. It was never about what Glenn had left behind. What mattered was the clarity I had gained, the freedom from Karina's grip, and the lessons I'd learned. Money didn't define me. Control didn't define me. For the first time, I defined myself. I reflected on the journey that had led me here. The years spent in the shadows of Karina's ambition, the coldness, the manipulation, it had been suffocating. I had been a man without a voice, without a choice. But now, I was my own man. The weight of her manipulation no longer crushed me, and she was fading from my life, just as I had hoped. There was no final confrontation with Karina, no dramatic showdown where I would reveal all her secrets. No need for that. I had already won. Now, she could keep the money, keep her connections, keep whatever illusion of control she clung to. It no longer mattered to me. What mattered now was the life I was building for myself, one where I wasn't her pawn, where I wasn't living under her shadow. The dogs barked, snapping me from my thoughts. I stood up and tossed the ball for the one with boundless energy, smiling for the first time in what felt like ages. I had a future now, a quiet, simple one, but mine. I could breathe, I could think, I could live, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally in control of my own story. Karina's final attempt to manipulate me had failed, just like everything else she had tried. The last chapter of that toxic relationship was closed, and I walked away from it with nothing more than my dignity, my freedom, and my newfound peace. I didn't need the inheritance to be whole. I didn't need her. I had everything I needed now.